Hey, what is going on, everyone? Happy Monday.
Hey! I'm excited for you today. It's another Monday. We're doing our newest segment and we're really excited about it.
Yeah, no, today is definitely going to be a good one. Welcome back to Monday Rundown, guys. Let's jump into today's question. So, guys, if you are brand new to Monday Rundowns, what we've been doing now is we're commenting on segments of information that we're getting from around the world from users and YouTubers like yourselves. You're sending in your videos, wanting to know what are our commentary and what our thoughts are on it. And today is going to be another great one. And today's topic is specifically going to be a really good one because we are discussing, let's get that drum roll. Today's topic, guys, is boom.
Are men falling behind? I don't know. There's a lot of talk about how women, in fact, are the ones who are less likely to be given opportunity for growth and, higher up movements and things like that, and less likely to be educated, all these things that we've heard, right? And so this is actually asking the reverse question. And so I'm really excited.
I love that even in your answer, though, you've already, to me, gone to where it usually discusses that. It's in like the workplace. And I think the video we're going to get in today maybe touches on other aspects of life that, is outside of your job. Can men be falling behind? So today should be a good one. So let's jump into today's video with our expert, Richard Reeves.
A number of people warned me against writing a book about boys and men because it's such a fraught subject, particularly in politics right now, and because so many people were afraid that merely drawing attention to the problems of boys and men was implying somehow less effort being paid to girls and women, that it's framed as zero sum, and it's sort of a whose side are you on question, and you have to be on one side or the other rather than just being on the side of human flourishing. One of the real challenges here is that if there are men missing from certain crucial areas of our society and our economy, that makes it harder for other men and boys to flourish in those areas. We have an education system that has a dearth of male teachers. We have a labor market where the jobs that are growing fastest are ones where we have the fewest men. And in families, there's the growth in what you might call the dad deficit or fatherlessness. As men are struggling in each of those areas, what you'll see is it'll be harder for other men to follow in their footsteps. It's harder for boys to flourish if their fathers aren't engaged. It's harder for men to enter occupations where there aren't men. It's harder for boys to do well at school where there are no male teachers to be seen. And so there's a very real danger that unless we act quite soon, that we will set in train something of a vicious cycle. I'm Richard Reeves. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. And my latest book is Of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why That Matters, and What to Do About it. The overall picture is that on almost every measure, at almost every age, and in almost every advanced economy in the world, the girls are leaving the boys way behind, and the women leaving the men. What nobody expected was that girls and women wouldn't just catch up to boys and men in education, but would blow right past them and keep going. Everyone was very focused, quite rightly, on getting to gender equality, getting to gender parity. It's not that long ago where there was a huge gender gap the other way, and there was huge focus, correctly, in the 70s and 80s to really promote women and girls in education. But the line just kept going. And nobody predicted that. Nobody was saying, what if gender inequality reemerges in just as big a way as now, in some cases bigger, but the other way around? And to some extent, everyone's still trying to get their head around this new world where, at least in education, when you talk about gender inequality, you're pretty much always talking about the ways in which girls and women are ahead of boys and men. And that's happened in a very, very short period of human history. So if you look at the US, for example, in the average school district in the US, girls are almost a grade level ahead of boys in English and have caught up in math. If we look at those with the highest GPA scores, the top 10%, 2/3 of those are girls. If we look at those at the bottom, 2/3 of those are boys. When it comes to going to college, there's a 10% gap in college enrollment, a similar sized gap in completing college, conditional on enrolling, And the result of those trends is that the gender gap in getting a college degree is now wider than it was in 1972, but the other way around. So in 1972, when Title IX was passed to promote more gender equality in education, there was a 13 percentage point gap in favor of men getting college degrees. Now there's a 15 percentage point gap in favor of women getting college degrees. So the gender inequality we see in college today is wider than it was 50 years ago. It's just the other way around. There's quite a fierce debate about the differences between male and female brains. And in adulthood, I think there's not much evidence that the brains are that different in ways that we should worry about or that are particularly consequential. But where there's no real debate is in the timing of brain development. It is quite clear that girls' brains develop more quickly than boys' brains do, and that the biggest difference seems to occur in adolescence. So what happens is in adolescence, we develop what neuroscientists call the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex of our brain is sometimes known as the CEO of the brain. It's the bit of your brain that says you should do your chemistry homework rather than going out to party. It's the bit of your brain that says it is worth maintaining a high GPA because it will help you get to college, which might help you in the future. And that bit of the brain develops considerably earlier in girls than in boys, between 1 and 2 years earlier, partly because girls go into puberty a bit earlier than boys, and that seems to trigger some of this development. What that means is that if you have an education system that rewards the ability to turn in homework, stay on task, worry about your GPA, prepare for college and so on, then just structurally, that's going to put at an advantage the group whose brains have developed earlier in those particular areas. And that turns out on average to be girls. I think it's a great irony of women's progress that by taking the brakes off women's educational opportunities and aspirations, we've revealed the fact that the education system is slightly structured against boys and men because of these differences in the timing of brain development. But it took the women's movement to show that, because the natural advantages of women in education were impossible to see when women's aspirations were being capped by a sexist society. Now that those caps have been largely removed, we can see that it's boys and men who are at a disadvantage in the education system. At the risk of sounding boring, let's collect the data first so we know what we're dealing with here. I do think that we should be strongly encouraging boys to start school a year later than girls. I think that should become the default in many school districts because of the developmental gap that there is between boys and girls. Because boys' brains mature more slowly, then them starting school a year later would mean that they were developmentally closer to being peers with the girls in the classroom. We need a lot more male teachers. It's striking that the teaching profession has become steadily more female over time. Only 24% of K-12 teachers now are male. That's down from 33% in the 80s. And fewer men are applying to teacher training year on year. And so we've seen this steady shift towards a close to an all-female environment. That has all kinds of consequences for the ethos of the school, for the way we deal with different kinds of behavior among boys and girls, for example. And so we need a very serious and intentional effort to get more men into teaching. The third thing I would do in this world where I have significant power to dictate policies would be significantly more investment in vocational education and training. That is an area where we do seem to see better results for boys and men on average, and one that's woefully underinvested in the US. The US has really bet most of its dollars on a very academic, a very narrow route towards success, and less emphasis on vocational training. And that has actually put boys and men at a disadvantage. So apprenticeships, technical high schools are actually a really good way to help more boys and men. I think one of the challenges with this debate is that if you're talking to women and men who are, say, at the top of the economic ladder, 4-year college degrees, decent incomes, they look around and they don't see some of these issues. But that's not the same for working class men. That's not the same for men lower down the economic ladder. So there's a danger that we're so busy, to borrow Sheryl Sandberg's phrase, so busy leaning in that we don't look down. The reality for men further down the ladder is very different. The economic trends for men have turned downwards along 4 dimensions. One is wages. Most men today earn less than most men did in 1979. In employment, with a drop in labor force participation of 8 percentage points, which means 9 million men now of prime age are not working. We've seen a drop in occupational stature. And so there are now more men working in employment areas which are seen as lower status than they were in the past. And we've also seen a drop in the acquisition of skills, the kinds of skills and education that boys and men need. If boys don't get educated and men don't get skilled, they will struggle in the labor market. And across all of those domains, we've seen a downwards turn for men in the last 4 or 5 decades. And so the way in which social class divides have opened up, economic inequality has widened, is really important to understand in the context of gender inequality. If we only focus on gender gaps, then we miss the fact that both men and women at the top have done increasingly well, but that's much less true of everybody else, and especially it's less true of those from lower income backgrounds, working class boys and men, and black boys and men. You see many of those trends are amplified, and so those boys and men are really at the sharpest end of many of the social and economic changes. On the one hand, we have a huge and successful and laudable effort to get more women into STEM jobs, so science,
Can we pause for just a moment? Because there's so much that just happened. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Sorry. He brought up a number of statistics that I was not aware of, and yet I'm also aware of. The fact that there are more women teachers in schools, I have wondered why that is. And I think it's very interesting that he gave the statistic proof to show that, right? Like it was you had 34% in the 80s were men, and now I wrote it down. Now it's 24%, right, currently. And I know what it means to model behavior, right? Like if you don't see anyone that looks like you being good at education, then you're less likely to think that thing is possible for you. So I was really glad that he pointed that out. I think it's, as the science geek in me, it's really interesting to hear how the differences in brain development, and a lot of it is in regards to like when people go into puberty, and that because girls go into puberty earlier, this is what starts the whole like prefrontal cortex development, which essentially is your executive functioning. And so that's huge. And I think it totally makes sense to then align that with when it would be most appropriate to start teaching or start educating if the brain is ready to accept executive functioning teaching at a certain moment. But if it's not ready to accept it because the brain hasn't developed, then why would you shove that down somebody's throat if they're not ready for it? So I really think this is really interesting, and I agree with several of those points. I think they make a lot of sense.
Well, to the last point you made, wasn't that in adolescence though? Not necessarily early on in school. He suggested not letting them, redshirting them a year before even getting involved with school, I guess, to account for that at that later stage. Oh, okay.
That's exactly what exactly.
Oh, okay. So this, I agree in terms of so far the information, the statistics is definitely very, very helpful because it obviously helps highlight certain things that I could speak for myself. I just wasn't even aware of. And then it puts, it lets you know it's just not him just saying things off the cuff. It's actually, data supports it. But the thing that came up for me was even in the beginning of the conversation or what he was sharing, I don't know if it's not necessarily emotions or just the way my mind was working was almost to say I felt like I was going to have a hard time believing what he's going to talk about because I feel I've been taught recently that the idea that men are behind can't be the case because of how much women have to go through. I mean, I could literally, I had thoughts in my head, like I had to start tuning things out so I could actually listen to what this guy was saying, because I realized and maybe it's just a lot of the stuff I look at now, it's so difficult for women. And not to take anything away from any challenge a woman may feel she's having, but the idea that men are having a hard time is so out there. I was almost ready to reject this before even hearing it. And that's such a thing. Like I love now when I become aware of things, like when I catch a thought and I'm like, what am I saying to myself? Because I mean, it really does speak to, again, a lot of the programming or all of the programming, I guess, that we are maybe that's put forth to us, and how if you are not ideas can be, and again, it's not to say that the challenges women that I believe women go through within race and areas, just those things aren't real as well. But I think it is funny where I didn't know the quote he mentioned from the woman when he said about leaning in. It's like we can lean so far into that ideology that another idea of someone else struggling becomes so foreign to you, because this subsection is going through so much that it means that another subsection of society cannot be going through something as well. And that was again, aside from all of the things that he did say, that was the thing that dominated my mind for a large portion of the beginning of this. Is as I'm listening to this, it's like, wow, look how far we swung the pendulum, that it ended up. And he also brought up a point about how it's because of what we were able to help women to succeed in, that it's helped us recognize that there is another area that we've also now maybe by doing so much. Or again, and I'd be careful there because it may not feel like a lot for a lot of people, but by helping many, we in fact may have hurt another, another area of society by what we're doing. And to his point, to the point you made, excuse me, Janelle, about not seeing things, I could probably count on my hands how many male teachers I remember having.
100%.
And I definitely know. Well, I had a robotic teacher. It was a guy, but a large portion of that was definitely in sports. Actually, I think all my math teachers were men going to school as well.
It's a cultural norm, right? Like you're seen in a better, your recognition or your reputation, if you will, is higher if you're a male teacher. Oh, you're a male teacher, but you teach science. Okay. Or you teach math. Oh, okay. Like that.
Yeah, the STEM stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like but if you're teaching English or drama or,
yeah.
You know what I mean? To your point, they're the coaches, like things like that. Like that's where you're going to find them, where there's a culturalness to this, like where people put respect. For example, professors, right? Like I just think professors in general, you're given a lot of respect if you're a professor versus if you're a high school or an elementary school teacher. So you will see a lot more male professors than you will see male teachers in like lower education, meaning like younger education.
Oh, okay, I see. Aspiring to get to that stature in terms
of there's a bit of that I think involved. I think it's really interesting that he focuses on younger education, because I think that's really crucial, and I think that's when there's a lot of plasticity in the brain, and so like we're like learning a lot. But I also recognize that there's the other side to this, where there's like a cultural acceptance, right? Like, oh, but they're a professor. Like being a professor in education is considered something really good and respectable. So you'll see a lot more men there.
Well, to that point, something he mentioned so far in terms of the income aspect of it, I could tell you that in terms of thinking about what I would want to do for a living, and this is obviously just unique to myself, I know my mindset was almost always around what is the most money I can earn doing whatever it is I'm doing. And I don't know if that's a male thing or just maybe a part of how men are being raised to recognize we are supposed to be, and again, use that term loosely, the breadwinner in a family, and therefore, doing a job for, because then, I don't know if necessarily male teachers make more than female teachers. You'd have to.
They probably do if you were to like break it down by the wages. Same job, but
I guarantee you, it's not 40,000 more, or I'd assume it's not that big of a gap there. And so for me, it's like, well, what are the jobs that I would, lawyer, doctor, I get, the old stuff that we used to be told.
Same thing. He mentions like how in healthcare, like you have this big, huge, like influx in like, there's a lot of jobs. I'm just going to say nursing, because that's.
Nursing is the one I think of as well, where females are
But there are more male doctors than there are female doctors. So it's like culture kind of makes you feel.
Dictates that.
Yeah, dictates that. Oh, to your point, there's more money in being a doctor, so more men will flock to being a doctor than they will go into nursing, right? Because the women
exactly.
So I feel like what he's saying is true, but I think that there's a cultural aspect to what we're seeing as well. we have helped many women, yes. And also there's a culture. So I think in order to make some of the shifts that he's describing, I think there will have to be some cultural shifting.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm sure when he gets into the family stuff, he'll maybe speak to some of those things. All right, let's jump back in now. Did I add it? All right.
Take the opposite side of the coin to STEM jobs. And that's where a lot of the jobs are coming from. Health and education alone are huge and growing sectors in the US. And so by my estimates, for every one job we're going to create in STEM between now and 2030, we're going to create 3 in HEAL jobs. But those jobs are at least as gender segregated as STEM jobs, but in the other direction. And unlike STEM, becoming more so over time. So if you look at the HEAL sector, only 24% of the workers in those sectors are male, and that number is falling. And in particular sectors, we're seeing a really precipitous drop in the number of men. We have a drop in the number of male teachers. We have a very sharp drop in the number of male psychologists. That's dropped from 39% male to 29% male in the last decade alone. And among psychologists under the age of 30, only 5% are male. So we roll that forward, and we're going to see psychology becoming essentially almost an all-female profession. So these jobs, which are both crucial, I think, for society and where it'd be very useful to have more diversity, are actually becoming more gender segregated. And so we have absolutely no effort to get more men into HEAL jobs, which is where I think the future lies and where we should be helping men to move. One of the problems that we face is what I call in the book a dad deficit. And that can be seen in various different ways. So 1 in 4 fathers don't live with their children. If parents split up, they're much more likely to lose contact with their fathers and with their mothers. And so 1 in 3 children, if their parents split up, don't see their father at all after a few years post the separation. So this fatherlessness is something that's very, very specific. And when 4 in 10 children are born outside marriage, and most children to less educated parents are born outside marriage, then we have to reinvent what it means to be a father. Because right now, men are still being held to an old standard of what it meant to be a successful father in a world where that is neither possible for many of them or even desirable. Because what we've seen is as women have grown in economic power and economic independence, then of course they're going to choose to be with a man rather than being forced to, as in the old days. This is probably the greatest liberation in human history, honestly, that women can now choose whether to be with a man or not. More than 2 out of 5 households in the US now, a woman is the main breadwinner. 40% of American women earn more than the average man. These are huge economic changes and all for the good. But it does pose some really sharp questions about what fathers are for. And until we escape the obsolete model of the breadwinner father, then we will continue to see more and more men being left out of family life. And the kicker is that boys in families that don't have a father presence suffer much more than girls. And so then what happens is that male disadvantage can become intergenerational, because if the fathers are struggling and therefore not really involved in their kids' lives, then the boys are the ones who suffer most, who will then go on to struggle themselves in education and the labor market.
Actually, I'd love if we can just right there. You're muted, Jay. Okay. So it's actually exactly where my mind was going when I started, based on what he was talking about in the last segment. And it's funny because this falls in a video that we had actually watched as a team with the our team in network marketing. There was one time we were doing something, we were doing the man box. And the gentleman there was discussing just different parameters that he viewed that men were, like how we're being judged as a man. And that provider one was one that came up for there. And it's funny because I grew up in a household where my mom has always been the predominant breadwinner. So growing up, I never realized that women didn't have the ability to earn as much as a man, because I always looked at a woman that my mother is, in terms of academically, has had more success there with her master's degree than my father, who only has a college degree. So again, I never believed that those were things, because in my household, I didn't see that as a thing. It was, what do you mean? My mom does better, makes more. And then when going out into the world, was like, oh, it's not like this in everyone's household. And the area where he talked about a man not doing, and I I always reference the Uncle Phil. Like, if you grew up watching the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and you saw Uncle Phil as a dad, I grew up thinking, oh man, my dad is not a great dad, because I saw Uncle Phil as a standard, as a black man, lawyer, very successful, provided, house in Bel Air. This dude is doing his thing. And my dad doesn't aspire or is not accomplishing anything near that. I must not have a great dad, didn't do the sports. So it's funny, because I'm listening to what he's talking about, just even the statistics of behind it, and how a lot of that stuff plays in an actual home, as to maybe not seeing your father, who is there, present father, but isn't a man or isn't a great example of that, because of what society has taught me we should be looking at in terms of how to determine what a good man is. So I can't even imagine what it's like to not even have a father in your household. Your expectations, and then how do you mentioned, I think is it called mirroring, when you see someone, you mentioned not having a male in front of the class. Is that what that's called? You don't see representation.
Model, like you don't
modeling.
Have
Thank you, modeling. Thank you. So imagine what it's like to not even have the model there to even make those judgmental statements again. Because I've always thought my dad's a great dad, but the standards that I think I have is just the idea that he was still there and he didn't leave us. He could have walked out. That's what, in my mind, at one point it was, wow, a lot of dads leave their kids. Mine must be good because he didn't leave. It's like things like that. I remember having very clear thoughts to myself, like, oh, my dad must be good based on this new thing. It's just the idea that he didn't walk out on us, because that bad dads leave their families.
Yeah, I like how he brought up that we're gonna have to redefine what being a father is.
Yeah.
Or like what makes a good father. I think to me that was like, if I had to bottom line it, I was like, yeah, that part.
No, that's definitely, I'm telling you, because in my mind, and I still deal with a lot of this. It's like, if I'm not making a certain income, and even especially now the way life is for me, it's like, then my value as a man is significantly less, because what I've been told is that's where my seed and the money I bring in every day is where my value can be found. And so not being able to contribute those things means I'm not worth as much. So this definitely plays a lot into maybe even again, hopefully the video gets there, but just the self-worth or lack of self-worth men have in this new society where, I mean, you say one not so nice thing and you are canceled and so on and so on. So let's get back into this. I love this video, guys. If you are loving this, let us know. Drop it in the chat below. All right, let's finish this one off. 2 minutes.
It's clear by now that marriage and social institutions and a sense of purpose matter to men. And so as we've seen these real challenges faced by men in education, work, and family, you're seeing some really difficult and troubling health consequences. And so the so-called deaths of despair, from suicide, overdose, to alcohol, 3 times higher among men than among women. Suicide itself, 3 times higher among men and women, and rising very quickly, especially among middle-aged men and younger men. So we can see these as symptoms, I think, of a broader malaise, which is what's troubling boys and men. And for men in particular, this sense of purpose is very important. I think it's a human universal that we need to be needed. There's a wonderful piece of work by an academic called Fiona Shand, who looked at the last words that men had used to describe themselves before committing suicide or attempting suicide. And the top of the list were worthless and useless. I think if we create a society in which so many men do feel like they're not needed, then it's no surprise that we see these deaths of despair. We see problems with opioids. Opioids are a much bigger problem for men than they are for women. And one of the great tragedies of opioid deaths is the death rates are higher in part because the users are on their own. And so in some ways, the opioid epidemic is a perfect illustration of a whole series of things we're talking about, which is a loss of role in the family, the loss of status in the labor market, turning to drugs, and being isolated and withdrawn. And so in that example, I think you can see a symptom of this broader male malaise that we just need to take it more seriously. And we have a cultural responsibility as a society, men and women together, to help men and boys to adjust to this new world. Because right now, many of them are really struggling.
Get smarter, faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers.
Damn, that one hit me right in the chest.
Well, thank you, Big Think, for producing this video. We're going to make sure to put the link for the video down in the comments so you guys can go back and check that out. And I think it's almost like you had to go through all of this like data in order to get to the final part, was probably, which again to me feels like this is the underlying issue. Why there's a strong sense that men have that they feel useless and worthless and like they're not needed. And what's going on there? And if we can address that together as men and women, if we can address that, I think the idea of even not having a purpose, I think adds to that, right? Like if you don't have a purpose, then you're going to feel worthless and like no one needs you. So if we could address that together as a culture, I think there's going to be there's a need for a lot of culture shifts.
For sure. And just to wrap this up, and I'll definitely make sure I also put the Man Box video that it was a TED Talk that we had watched, but just for the context, because it's funny that I mentioned worthlessness and then it comes up at the end, but just to put a ribbon on it, I definitely can attest to a lot of what he is talking about. And what you said, Janelle, it's interesting that we had to start with the data to get to where we ended up, because I don't know if he had just came out and the talk was about that last segment. And even for myself, because I'm telling you, as the video started, I just the idea, and I'm grateful for the many women in my life, the tons of resources that I find that's out there that does allow me to be aware of what women go through in some sense, not in obviously having a full grasp of it, but just an idea, like something as simple as women walk with, their car keys in their hand for fear of danger. When they see, hey, do you see those dangerous guys across the street? And I'm like, what guys? I'm like, I don't even pick stuff like that up. But the part where he finished off by saying how many men are alone, the idea that we cannot share how or what we're going through, even when he mentioned about the lack of male in the psychology, as far as a psychologist, made me even think of, because I see there are a lot of commercials that run now on YouTube that are talking about, how you can get therapy at home with, I can't remember the name of the company, but, and one of the advertisements, the woman stresses how she wanted to have a female therapist that was a certain age, certain, race. And in my mind, it was, oh, wow, I wonder how many male therapists they even have on that site, or that
5% of psychologists under 30 are male. 5.
So it's like
under 30. I was floored.
So even now, a guy maybe even thinking, oh, let me go out and find this for myself. You are not even able to find, again, and maybe you're more comfortable talking to another man about certain things because you'd want them, just like a woman, to feel like someone can actually relate to what you're going through. And you don't even have the representation in that industry to even provide the help you need. As challenges that it may be for a man to even think, let me go get therapy, because talking with my drinking buddies at the bar it's not helping it. It's not getting it done. And male suicide is definitely something that the statistics are there. It's clearly on the rise. And I could definitely that worthlessness.
Contextualization. For those of you who are out there who are thinking what I'm thinking, men are also more successful at actually committing suicide because the types of methods that they use are usually just more efficient, because for men, efficiency is important.
Oh yeah, we want to get it done.
To use things that aren't as efficient at getting the job done. But that being said, I think he compounded that with the statistics of those who also try, which to me is the important distinction. Those who actually try, the number of people who are men who have been trying has been significantly
successful.
Increasing.
Well, Janelle, because I know you have worked with a suicide hotline, and since this topic did come up, is there any, and I think we should end it with that. Is there anything,
Yeah.
any advice, a number that you could give, resources
Please. Yes.
for
If
anyone that's going to do something like that?
So in New York, you can call Samaritans, but
Okay.
there is a national suicide prevention hotline. I can tell you what it is right now. You can send a text to 988. And you can literally send a text to 988 and that will get you in touch with somebody right away. And if you want to call someone, it's 1-800-273-8255.
I'm trying to type that up, but I can't. Okay, so I won't get that done. Well, you know what? We will put that, we will edit the description for this one and throw that information in there for you guys. Again, if you're going through something and you're having any of these type of thoughts or, feeling overwhelmed, please look back to the resources Janelle just shared and check out in the description below. Your safety and your well-being is what we care about more than views, obviously, and any of that type of stuff. So
100%.
I think that's a good space for us to step away from this one. Again, guys, if you enjoyed this video, definitely we will make sure that one's linked for you guys right up here. And again, I will find the video about the man box and we'll link that one in this video as well. But until next time,
as always, remember, you deserve the good life.